Okay, so that was exciting. We're gonna try and see if we can still get through everything. We'll find out. If we don't, no worries. A lot of it will get posted to the website, and we'll just do the rest of the content in another session. It's the nice thing about not actually being a guest speaker is that I'm around all the time. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Efrie. With Uchenna's incredibly valuable assistance, I run the Philadelphia Dynamo user group. We are looking to expand to something of an advisory panel. So if anyone else is interested in getting involved in running the group, it's a good thing to put on your resume when you're applying for Autodesk University speaking positions, among other things. Feel free to let me know. We'd love to have you. All right, I think Uchenna already covered all of our other important stuff. So let's get going. So today we are doing documentation, and also along with that, we're going to talk a little bit about using Dynamo to help QA, quality assure, quality control your documents. One of the things with that, and I think actually the first thing with that, is actually quality assuring your Dynamo scripts. So one of those really important things is making sure that more than one person can use your scripts. Scripts become illegible very, very quickly. So one of the things that people have started doing to standardize a little bit is making these templates that allow you to use grouping to make your stuff a little bit more legible. So I'm going to walk you through KT's template that we use. I'm going to show you really briefly the color coding scheme that AECOM uses. Theirs is a little simpler than ours. And then we'll dive into doing some scripting work. So first of all, we start off with a README file for the people who are authoring things. Essentially, it collects all of the metadata that you want associated with the file, things like who wrote it originally, so when you have questions, you can find them. What it's called, what version of Dynamo it was written in. That's a pretty important one because not all versions of Dynamo are compatible with each other. And then what inputs you're using, what the output hypothetically is supposed to be. And then really important is this thing circled in red. It's your dependencies. So this is all of your packages and things that you are using in the script. When you are authoring a script, or a graph, to use the correct Autodesk words, that's something that can be really challenging to keep track of, because if you've already imported all of your packages, they just come up when you're searching for things. So there's an amazing tool that you can install called Monocle. And I will show you exactly where that is in my Dynamo interface when I open up Dynamo. But essentially, you run it, you get a nice little meme in the corner, but then you also get a list of every single package that's being used in that Dynamo script, so that you're able to really quickly and easily fill in things like which dependencies your script has. The other thing that we do is we keep track of whether or not it's ready for Dynamo Player. We'll talk about Dynamo Player and how to make your scripts ready for that, but essentially that means that other people in your office do not need to open Dynamo to run your Dynamo scripts. That's how Dynamo Player works. It allows them to just pick the file they want to run, hit a play button, and then fill in some stuff in a little bit more of a user-friendly interface. So if people get really intimidated about the idea of using Dynamo graphs or scripting in general, it's a good way to con them into using it. All right, so the next thing in terms of our template, we keep track of our inputs. We have two different basic colors for our inputs. One is green, one is purple. You don't need to worry too much about the difference between the dark purple and the light purple. Honestly, half the time I don't even know which group they're supposed to be in. But the green inputs are the ones that we're using for Dynamo Player, which is essentially looking for data from the user being put into the script. And then purple are inputs that we are taking out of the Dynamo file and putting into Dynamo, out of the Revit file and into Dynamo. So keeping track of what's being imported from the file and then also keeping track of where we want the users to be interfacing with things. So if someone's trying to learn Dynamo but hasn't really used it before, and you want to give them the ability to play with some stuff without breaking anything, that's what goes in green. So if there's a slider that they're supposed to manipulate, or they're supposed to pick an element out of the Revit file, that goes in the green box. All the stuff you don't want them touching goes in the other colored boxes. Next thing is the gray boxes. We make them gray to make them look even more boring. This is actually where the heart of the logic of the Dynamo graph goes. Again, you don't need to worry too much about primary versus secondary versus auxiliary logic. That's something that we do internally just so that we can have a little bit more hierarchy within our different groups, because we end up getting these graphs that are gigantic and unwieldy otherwise. But essentially, we tell everyone who is not an author in Dynamo, don't touch the stuff in gray. It's been locked so you can't change it. It's totally a lie. You cannot lock it. But the idea being that gray makes it look boring, makes it less interesting, and hopefully people aren't going to fool around with it if they don't know what they're doing. And then finally, we have essentially data management. The sort of teal color is just when we're trying to aggregate a whole bunch of stuff, trying to collect data into a single place. A lot of times we'll have a lot of watch nodes around there to be able to see what data it is that we're collecting. This is just a place to put that, or when we're doing list management, which we'll be doing quite a bit of today. And then the orange is, these are your output things. Again, really useful to have that in a separate color when you're doing something with Dynamo Player. So you need to basically mark, what is the input from the user? What do you want the user to get as output? And also really useful in terms of keeping track of where stuff is that's coming out on your graph as you're writing them. And then finally, we have blue for being able to do internal notes, annotation and things like that when we want to be able to add extra explanation if the steps are a little bit more complicated, that type of thing. Or if we just want to have a place that we have watch nodes for people to be able to check against, we'll put that stuff into here. But these are essentially just like blue because they're calm, hopefully, and not changing a whole lot. And then finally, hot pink for, hey, this thing is still under construction. This is the part where I don't know what works and what doesn't, or the part that I'm actively working in. So again, trying to think about having more than one author working in the same file. If you're the only person in your office who is making stuff in Dynamo, you probably don't need to use this hot pink. So that's ours. It's pretty complicated. We've got a lot of extra colors and gradients and things that probably you don't need, unless you're working with a whole bunch of different authors doing lots of crazy things. This is an example of AECOM's color coding that they use. It's different from ours in terms of what's pink versus what's blue versus what's green, but essentially it's similar in the logic. So you have one color that is, here's the stuff that the user's supposed to interface with and needs to interface with for the script to run. Then we're doing stuff in terms of interaction between Dynamo and the file that it's working on. There are processes and computation happening. We're making stuff in Dynamo. We're pushing that stuff from Dynamo out to Revit. And then finally, we're potentially writing data, writing to Excel, writing to data within the Revit file, parameters, that type of thing. So templates are really useful. I find actually even as a solo author sometimes, it can be very useful because Efrie of 6 months ago knows a lot of things that Efrie now doesn't. And Efrie of 5 years ago was like this brilliant person who I can never figure out what the heck she was thinking. So it can be really useful even just looking back at your own work to be able to have a little bit of grouping and explanation within your files. So the basics of what we're going to be working on today in terms of understanding computational logic. One is lists. Essentially, lists are exactly what you think they are. It's stuff that can be itemized. We always start counting from 0 in most computer programming languages, Dynamo included. And essentially, it's a numbered list of items, just like your grocery list or your to-do list. There are 4 basic ways you can make lists in Dynamo if you're making them from scratch. There are lots of ways of making lists if you're collecting stuff out of a Revit file. We'll see a lot of that today. But essentially, this is just 3 different ways of making kind of placeholder lists. One being using the code block. We will use the code block, but nothing that's quite that intense today. But this just shows you, if you're used to seeing computation, if you write in Python or any of the other languages, this should look relatively familiar to you in terms of how lists are formatted. The code block in the middle, oh, you can't see my mouse, that's fine. The code block in the middle is design script, which is Autodesk's special computer language that they have made. And essentially this is saying, I want to make a list that has starts at 1, goes up to 10, and makes steps in increments of 1, which is what this is saying. People who are super advanced in Dynamo might write stuff directly in design script. People who started in Dynamo back when it was like Dynamo 0.5 frequently will write things in design script. For those of us who started a little later, once they added Python blocks and stuff into it, this is a little less commonly used. But if you want to learn their syntax, it can be really useful. And then finally, there are nodes within Dynamo that are specifically just to make lists. So this is an example of one. I think in the core, there's like 5 or 6 different versions. This one just says, make a repeated item, a list of the same item over and over again. Give me what item you want that to be and the number of times you want me to repeat it. And as you can see, it makes 10 different repetitions of the number 1, because that's what I gave it. But you also could have it be that your item is like, I don't know, puppies, and it'll give you a list that is 10 puppies. It'll just say puppy, 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 puppy over again. When you see my desktop, you'll understand I'm a little obsessed with my dog. Okay, so important thing to note with that, right? It's 10 items, but Efrie, it only goes up to 9. It's because we started counting at 0. So once we have a list, we then can do a lot of stuff to it. We can, first of all, this is just using that list of repeated item again. So I'm making, in this instance, 3 lists, each of which start from 1 and go up to 10. So you'll see there are a bunch of levels here. What I'm doing, if you want to get technical about it, is I'm creating a nested list. So there's an inner list that counts from 1 to 10, and then there's an outer list that's 0, 1, 2, right? Each of which has a list from 1 to 10 in it. We can transpose that, which works just the way that if you've ever transposed your rows and columns in Excel. So what it does is it takes, all right, my first item in every list, I'm going to collect that into a list. My second item in every list goes into a list. All right, so it continues in that method. And basically, you can just think of it as being like flipping rows and columns, right? We can count how many things are in our list, right? There are 10 things in our list. And we can flatten. Flattening means that we squish in by all the levels. So however much nesting we've got, the default is to flatten it completely so that we have no more nesting. If we only want to flatten by 1 level, we would input the amount that we want to flatten and just call it 1. So that's the background of code that you need to know. What we are going to attempt to cover, now that we're down to just over an hour instead of being at an hour and a half like I thought we would be, is batch renaming of views, QA/QC of your work sets, so the ability to export basically all of your items and which work set they're associated with so that you can clean up your work sets if you want to and know what's not in the right one. There is a Dynamo script that you can use to then take those things that are on the wrong work set and move them on to the right one. We're not going to work with that one today because I did not have time to prep all those files ahead of time, but we're just going to export a list of essentially all the items in the file and which work sets they're associated with. We're also going to export the equipment list, so every piece of mechanical equipment. Hopefully there is some in this file. I forgot to double check it before I came over today. Then I'm going to walk you through a script that helps you write data specifically back to your equipment. This can be used for mechanical equipment. It can be used for structural items. It can be used for essentially furniture, anything that exists as a separate type of component. We're going to adjust all the pipe heights in the file. So if your consultants are anything like ours, frequently they like to draw things in essentially 2D and then send it to us to fit into our file. And we find that all of our pipes are floating at desk height, which is not ideal in the laboratory setting. So this is one of the things that you can do to adjust them, and it just moves all of them up. And then we're also going to do a script that hypothetically you would do when you're about to start, say, clean out for a major submission set, like your SD set or your CD set. After everyone's been working in Revit for a while, adding a bunch of rooms, adding a bunch of doors, adding a bunch of random spaces, all the numbering ends up being super out of order. So what this does is it clears everything out so that you can go back in and have it all be renumbered. And again, there is a script that does the renumbering. We covered it in January of this year, so I didn't include it in this grouping. But you know, we could always bring that back again if people wanted to see it again. And then if there's time, which I put on here when I thought I had half an hour longer than I have, we'll also walk through how to automatically, when you set up your Revit file, create your sheets and place all of the associated views onto that sheet and name the title block all at once. It's awesome, but also takes a little bit more time. In case we do run out of time, or if you find me confusing and you want to listen to people who explain this really, really well, these scripts came from Autodesk University presentations by Matthew Anderle of AECOM and Drew Jarvis of SolidCAD. If you go to the AU website, they have videos of their presentations up there, and you can watch them. The AECOM presentation actually had 22 different scripts like this that just were about saving time. I just pulled the ones that had more specifically to do with like quality control and documentation. So, yes. From AECOM is Matthew Anderle. He's up there on the screen. Yeah. Much thanks to these guys because I'm basically cribbing their work directly. All right. So, in terms of what we're doing now is that I'm going to attempt to live code all of these. So don't hate me if I get it wrong. All right, so we're in Dynamo. I'm gonna do this within the KT Dynamo template. I'm not gonna be grouping stuff and annotating just because that takes a little bit of extra time that we don't really have right now. Just so you can see, this is Monocle installed on my computer. It's that app I was telling you about that'll tell you all of your packages that your script is dependent on. Right now, we actually don't have any packages that are being used, but if I were to take, like, I don't know, something random from Data Shapes and bring it over, and then maybe something from Duct Tape and add that, right? Got a few things in here. Then I go up to Monocle. These things are fun. The Alignifier makes stuff look pretty. Sticky Notes works the same way Sticky Notes does for Windows. Custom colored grouping, and then also your package Monocle. So it tells me that I'm currently using in this script Data Shapes and Duct Tape as my packages. You can copy and paste it. You can annotate your nodes, etc. So very, very useful add-in for Dynamo. All right, so getting started. We are going to start with, all right, just gotta get all my notes in a row here. All right, we are going to start with just renaming the views. So I'm working in the advanced file here. As you can see, they've got things called levels and also some things called floors, which is kind of annoying. It's also all in like European sizing and everything, so that's always fun. And then as long as my computer's not in the middle of crashing, we'll get going. They switched out my laptop on me to a new one that would be better this week. And it turns out better means that regularly the graphics card crashes. All right, so we're going to get going. We're going to start by, whenever I write a script, I like to start by thinking about where I want to end up. So in this instance, I'm going to be trying to rename all of my views, right? Which means that I'm ending up with setting the view parameter, the name parameter for my views. So I'm going to start at the end, which is just with element dot set parameter by name right here. All right. And now the thing that I always like to tell all of my students, good Grasshopper and good Dynamo, the people who make those nodes, they do them well when they tell you exactly what it is that they're looking for. So if you can figure out what you want at the end, you can kind of work your way backwards just by looking at what they're looking for and giving it to them. So we're going to start by just adding our parameter name. And I will post to our page any of the scripts that we get done tonight, so you can download them directly if you don't want to be following along. So all parameter names in Revit are always a data type called a string. I know we kind of covered that last time, but essentially strings are the way that computers think about, like, the way that you probably would think about reading, right? If you're reading something that says the word 20, then you process it as text rather than processing it necessarily as a number. So similarly, our view name is a string. So that's our parameter name. Now we have to go backwards a little bit. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here, because getting actually the elements that we want to rename are going to take us a little while. So we're going to start with selecting all of our views, right? So element by type, which is no. So we'll go way faster if my computer stops freezing in the middle. But what we're going to be doing is taking essentially all of a, nope, I want types, not categories, sorry. All of a type. So what we want is get by type. Wrong one. Here we go, element types. So I want to get all of my view types. And in this particular instance, I'm going to update my plans. So these are all the views that are of the plan type. But you certainly could do the same thing for your views that are elevations or your views that are axons, essentially all of the different types that they have in here. This is the same basic way that you would go through to change any individual parameter that you wanted to overwrite across the board. So hypothetically, if you wanted to like change the material parameter for your flex duct, you would collect all of your elements that way as well. So now I've got my types. Now I want to get all elements of type. Come on. Yep, I type. So I got my view. Apparently that one doesn't work. So I want my all elements type yes, but when I typed that in, it didn't show up. The node that I want is called all elements of type, which is not showing up in this search, so instead we'll do it over here. And see if it works. This hates me. Okay. Sorry, this is why you should not do live demos. You should pre-make everything. Oh. Whoop, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Hey. Source brain power from other people. It always works better. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to switch to manual so that this isn't automatically running in the background, because that might be why we're having trouble. All right, and what you can see is that after I've collected all of my views that are plans, this is now giving me a list of all of those plan views. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, no problem. So all nodes in Dynamo have, if you hover over them, you'll get the little box popping up below it, which tells you what the output is, or what the primary output is. When you hover over that, you'll get the little dot, dot, dot next to the pin. If you click on the pin, the list will stay. So a lot of people really like using watch nodes every single time. Watch nodes, I think, are really, really useful if you have more than one output coming out of a node, which we don't in this script, but we will, or actually we're going to in the next box that I'm going to add. But if you only have one output, then the thing that pops up below it is exactly the same thing that's going to pop up in your watch node. So feel free to add a watch node if you want to, but it's kind of redundant. So the next thing that we're going to do is a filter by Boolean mask, and I'm going to explain how that works in just a minute. So what it's looking for is a list, which we have, right? We have our list of all of our views, and then what's called a mask, which essentially it's looking for a list of trues and falses, which we are about to create. So what I said when I was looking at their naming convention for their views is, this is super annoying. Why do they call some things levels and some things floors? So what we're going to do is we're going to replace everywhere that it says the word floor with the word level. Because, you know, the Autodesk demo is not that exciting, doesn't have that many words for us to replace that are common across them. But you could see where when you're trying to make your drawing set, someone's gone through and one person decided to call all of your plans schematic plans or something else when they put the views on the sheets, and you want to change the names of all of those without having to go to each individual view, you can go in and do that. Or someone put in detail plan when actually what you want it to say is room plan or whatever. You can go in and update those. So what we're going to be doing is just creating a code block. So you do that by double clicking. And this is essentially open. You can write whatever you want in here. As long as it's valid scripting language, it'll work. We're not going to do anything complicated with it. This is just to show you another way of generating a string. So if you remember over here, we made a string by using a node called string. I'm going to do the exact same thing over here, but I'm going to do it in a code block. So to make a string, you just put quotes around a thing. So floor. And then to tell Dynamo that I'm done, I put a semicolon at the end. And now I've got something that makes a string that says floor. Similarly, I want to replace that with the word level. Yes, so what this is doing is it's saying to the computer, hey, I wrote some wordy stuff. I want you to use it. You can make it not be case sensitive. We'll have an example of searching for text without being case sensitive later. I'm starting off with the simpler stuff with the fewest nodes, and we're working our way up. But for right now, think of it, the code blocks are case sensitive. You'd have to add a different node to make it not be case sensitive when it's searching for it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to filter all of those views, because if you look at our views right now, right, we've got some floor plan views, we've got ceiling plan views, we've got area plan views, right? All of them have names, but not all of the names have the word floor in it that needs to be replaced with the word level. So what I want to do is I want to filter this so that we only have the ones that have the word floor to then be replacing the word floor with level. So I'm going to be doing it by the name of the element. So what I'm looking for is something called element name. Makes a lot of sense, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my elements, bring them over here. If I run this, what we'll see is now I've got just, instead of having the entire Revit item, right, which is this whole long thing, including an ID number and all kinds of other stuff, now I've just got the names in this list. Then what I'm going to be doing is saying, does this string, right, this clustering of words and spaces and numbers and all kinds of other characters, contain what I'm looking for? So string dot contains. So the string that I'm searching is this one. I'm looking for the word floor. And then I can choose to ignore the case, right? So if we think that our intern or, you know, the guy who forgot to drink his coffee this morning sitting next to us forgot to have their caps lock on, and might have stuff in uppercase or lowercase, or might have some sort of weird funky camel case thing going on, we can turn on ignore case. If you hover over it, it tells you what it's looking for. So it says bool, which means Boolean. Boolean means something's either true or it's false, one or the other, black and white. And by default, this value is set to false. So by default, it will not ignore the case. It's going to look exactly for what I give it. If I want it to include the case, then I need to add a Boolean toggle, right? So this just allows me to change that. So I can say, actually, you know what? I don't trust that whoever the people at Autodesk were that made this file maintained a common case across all their names. So search every possible combination of uppercase and lowercase that makes this work. So now, coming out of this node, if I run it, we get a list that is just whether or not the item in this list has the word that I'm looking for. And for each item in the list, it tells me it's either true or false. This is what I'm going to use to generate my mask. So remember I was saying, sorry, I'm going to move this out of the way, didn't give myself enough room. Remember how I was saying, like, this thing is looking for a mask to cover up the ones that aren't relevant? Everything that is not relevant is now marked false. So when I connect this up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get two, and this is where we have two things coming out, so I'm going to get two lists. And that means I want to have two watch nodes. Right? One showing me what's in, what am I keeping, and one showing me what's out, what's getting masked out. When I run, you'll see now that we have a bunch of floor plans that have in their name the word floor, that is in their name, all kinds of other words, but not the word floor, that's out. So now all I have to do, now that I have my list of ones that I want to rename, I just have to actually rename them. So we're going to use this whole set parameter by name thing. And what I want to do is rename those filtered views. So what I'm going to do is take my element name using my list of stuff that's in. Right? So this is just now going to give me essentially the same thing that was over here, but having removed all the stuff that's irrelevant. All the different views that don't have the word that I'm looking for are not going to be included in here anymore. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the part of the name that I don't want. So we know that the name is a string, and I want to replace something. So string.replace. Very frequently, people who make these nodes use the words that you expect them to use. So one format that Dynamo is trying to move towards is the thing that you're working on. If it's an element, if it's a string, if it's a category, if it's a type, you start with that word, you put period after it, and then the action that you want to do to that first word. Not all the packages are conforming to this yet. Actually, maybe 50% or less of the packages are conforming to that. But it's a good place to start if you don't know what it is that you're looking for. It's way faster than trying to go through this way. So my string is going to be this one. I am searching for the word floor, which is all the way over here. And I'm replacing it with the word level. Right? So my string, looking for the word floor, replacing it with the word level. Now I've got my new strings, which is great. So if I run that, I should have the slowest computer alive, but it has now replaced the word floor with the word level. So everywhere that it had said O2 floor, it now says O2 level. Now all I need to do is write that back into Revit. So I've got my string that I want to put into my view name. And then I need my element. So the element is not the name of the element, it's the actual element itself. So I want to go back to my filtered list, take this, and put it in here. Now when I run this, I'm going to try and move this over so you can actually see it while it's working. It's going to double check. Revit will occasionally do that. When you say, I want you to massively change something in my Revit file through Dynamo, every once in a while, Revit will check with you that you actually want to do that. Most of the time, it will not check with you. So don't rely on this happening every single time. But for some reason, when you are renaming views, it will always check with you. All right, so yes, I want to rename them all. And now it's working, and you'll see that now all of my view names have been changed to being level instead of floor. So that's our first one. All right, thank you. Yes? Uh-huh. The element set parameter by name. Mm-hmm. Element types. Mm-hmm. Yes. Great. Awesome. I've got them both. My name. Yep. So I would use the string view plan. All right. So this is an example of how things can be made to not get messed up by your coworkers.
It just changes. I would run it, it would work.
Yeah. So something to be aware of when you are using nodes that have these fly-out drop-down menus is that sometimes, because Windows is awesome on your computer, if you've been working in that and then you roll your mouse while it's hovering anywhere near that box, it will roll through and change the thing that you've selected. You can either be hyper vigilant about not doing that, or you can do things like this where you're just hard coding in essentially what you want. Yeah. And that's why. Yeah. So I frequently mysteriously change mine when I'm zooming. But also, you know, sometimes the gremlins in the computers do things. That's why live coding is always a terrible idea, and I should not have planned on doing that this whole session, but I did anyway. So one of the things you can do is essentially make sure that there's nothing that can be changed. However, it's also something that if this is a thing that you're going to be doing a lot of, so as I said when we first started, this was to rename some view types, right? If I want to go through a whole bunch of different view types relatively quickly, like views on sheets, section views, etc., and be changing a whole bunch of words, then I probably want to be able to use the scrolling function. Otherwise, a lot of times, especially with packages, you can find things that help you set those so that they can't be changed by yourself in the future, or other people who will come in and screw up your files. Usually when it's screwing up my files, it's more that it's myself in the future. So in this instance, right, we just added something with clockwork, so we would want to make sure that we noted that somewhere, because then when we're pushing it out to someone else, or even just to ourselves but on a different computer, we would need to make sure that the clockwork package was installed.
So
Yes.
that add-in for the model, that
Yep.
only tracks what is being used in the script, even if you have loaded a bunch of other packages.
Yeah, so I've got, I don't know, 18 packages or something. All it does is it looks what's in the graph and tells you what's there, which can be great, because if you are going to hand this off to someone, especially someone who maybe never worked on computers when they first started out doing architecture, engineering, and had to learn how to not hand draft things in the computer draft, a lot of times the idea of like doing this stuff is a little bit of black magic. It can be really nice to be like, okay, I'm just going to install these 3 things on your computer, and then all you have to do is click a play button. The way that you can set that up, I'm just going to real quickly preview this. We'll go over in a separate session way more in-depth Dynamo Player, but since my computer is deciding to freeze again anyway, what you can do on the things where you want those people to be able to interface and give them inputs is if you right-click on the node, you can have it say is input. If you select it and tell it it is an input, then Dynamo Player will allow that to be changed through the Dynamo Player. That's another reason why, even though this is really, really nice in terms of making sure it doesn't get messed up, if I want someone to be able to scroll through and do a couple different things, having a code block that is input is something that generally is not going to work for the type of people who are using Dynamo Player. So something that's like a drop-down menu. Everyone's pretty comfortable with those at this point. All right, so that's this one. And yes, I'm going to save this while you ask me the question. By the way, I'm going to leave both of these things just sort of floating in here so that when it gets uploaded to the website, you've got it. Yes, your question. Yeah, so that's something that's really nice about like using some nodes like this. We're going to use the category collector later, where you're just scrolling through and you're selecting the category of the thing that you want. We know it's looking for an element type, right? So that's something that if you're doing it this hard code way, and hard coding doesn't mean like it's more challenging or anything like that. It just means that it can't be really changed easily. It's not using a user interface to change it. You have to know that that's what you're looking for. So something else you can do, and something else that I've done, is gotten the nodes that have the drop-down menus, looked through them for the thing that I want, and then written it in a code block right next to it. Because people like to fuddle with things in my office. And so I like to leave the things that they're going to mess around with off on the side where they can't mess up the stuff that I actually want to have happen. All right, so that is this one. And now I'm going to start a new script that is just going to export all of our equipment out to an Excel file. So this is, and honestly, I'm not sure whether or not Autodesk put any equipment into this building. We'll find out when we get there. All right, so again, starting with the end in mind, I'm going to add in export Excel. So this is our final thing that we're looking for. We need first a file path. So that's exactly what it looks like. And this is just asking me where do I want to put it once we've written the Excel file. It is a user input, so if we were doing this with Dynamo Player, we'd mark that as is input. If we were annotating this properly, like a good coder would, we would mark this as being a user input group. So for now, I'm just going to put this as being common. It's just going to write it to here. Oh, it wants an actual. All right. So this is a thing that is kind of new with Dynamo, that they're willing to write directly to Excel. It used to be that when you were exporting your data, you had to export to a CSV. And then it would generate a brand new file for you. Dynamo doesn't want to do that with an actual Excel file anymore, or at all, ever. So the thing that we are, oh, come on. So the thing that we are going to have to do is make essentially an empty Excel file to then have it write to. It wants a blank Excel file to be able to write to. I don't know if it's because they don't know what version of Excel you have on your computer, and therefore they need it to be made ahead of time. I don't know if it's that like Autodesk and Microsoft are feuding with each other and therefore no one wants to play nice. Whatever the reason, on the back end, if you're writing to a CSV, it'll just generate the file for you and write it. If you're writing to Excel, you need an Excel document to point it to for it to write to. Again, I don't know why. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You know why? No. Oh, okay. I was gonna say, that'd be really exciting. So if you're trying to write information from a pre-existing Excel file, you're pointing to the pre-existing Excel file. It already exists. So now I've just made this blank one that I've called equipment list, because we're going to need that. So my file path now is going to be going to my empty equipment list Excel file. All right. Then it wants to know the sheet name. So my worksheet name, oh, I should have kept my Excel file open. Efrie, what are you doing? All right. I believe it's just called sheet 1 because it's a blank file, but we're just gonna double check that because I need to make sure I get the right spaces and capitalization and everything in it. All right, sheet 1 with no spaces, perfect. So code block, making a string, sheet 1. No space, thank you. I did that on purpose to see if you guys were paying attention, I swear. All right, and remember, you could do this by using the string node instead if you wanted to. Now it's asking me for where it should start, right? Start row and start column. Now, in Excel, it will say row 1 and column A. Dynamo, however, starts counting from 0. So what it actually wants as an input is a 0. just in case you ever wanted to start writing in a different column, I like to keep them as two separate lines. So in the code block, what I did, you could do this as two separate code blocks, but if you are doing something really, really simple, just those semicolons tell Dynamo, hey, that's the end of my thought, that's the end of my line, right? It's like writing a period when you're writing a sentence. And so what we have now are two different, we have Dynamo crashing. And then we have two different outputs in the code block. So similarly, if I was writing two different strings, I could have sheet 1, and then I could also have sheet 2, even though that doesn't exist and we're totally not going to use it. Right? Those are just two different outputs. You could also have just X and Y as your two different outputs. And now it's going to give you two different outputs and it's going to name them. So this was just 0 and then 0. So my start row is 0, my start column is 0. The reason that I like to keep both of those in there is because at some point I might want to add additional information. So if I've already got my equipment list with every piece of equipment in it, and then I want to add my new equipment that wasn't there before, or I want to add an additional column of data, different parameters, then I don't want to be starting at column 0. I want to just add one additional column to the end of whatever my thing was. Remembering that although Excel starts counting at 1, Dynamo starts counting at 0, so you're always offsetting by 1. Yes? Mm-hmm. Potentially, but it also might cause Dynamo to explode. So, yeah, you can write to whatever sheet you want. If the sheet exists already in the file, so if, I can't remember if I left open, I did. So if we were to create a new sheet that we called, I'm not feeling particularly creative today, so I'm just going to call it equipment. Right? I could then go back into Dynamo and have this write to the equipment sheet instead of sheet 1. It's supposed to create a new sheet. I generally go with anything that I haven't rigorously tested when I'm passing stuff back and forth between two programs. I try to avoid doing just because, well, as you can see, my laptop is not the most reliable, but also because sometimes different versions of Dynamo work differently. And I know in the older version, if you tried to look for a sheet that didn't exist, it would just keep looking forever. It's great that in the new version that doesn't happen. All right, so now we've got our file path, we've got our sheet name, we've got our start column. We're going to need to put data in here at some point. I'm going to skip that for now because that's the hard part. And then it just wants to know, are we overwriting? So if we have old data, existing data in the sheet, do we want to write our new data on top of it and obliterate all the older stuff? Or do we want to add it adjacent to it? In this instance, and it's just looking for a Boolean again, I'm going to say yes, overwrite it. Especially since we don't actually have any data in this file. Generally, if you are doing an export to Excel, I recommend doing it in a fresh, either doing it in an entirely fresh file or starting in a brand new column or a brand new row that you haven't used before and saying yes, overwrite. Again, it keeps it cleaner on the computation side, so you're less likely to have errors. All right, so now we're going to work our way backwards through the more complicated stuff once my computer stops thinking about the easy stuff. It is out of the box. Almost everything that I'm doing today is going to be out of the box. This is part of why it keeps thinking. So I was an automatic. Never be an automatic. It's terrible. I know there's a way to change that by default. It's just I update the version of Dynamo I'm using pretty regularly, and I always forget to do it. All right, so now we are going to start with the category of stuff that we are going to pull the data from to write to our Excel. So we're going to start with category. Which, there we go. It's just further over than I thought. And I'm going to write out all of my mechanical equipment. Again, this is something that I believe Clockwork has a category by name you could hard code in. But especially with this one, very frequently when we're doing this near a big deadline, near like the DD deadline or near the CD deadline, we are writing out lots of different categories of things for coordination purposes. So for instance, we might be writing out something about all of our beams or all of our columns or all of our mechanical equipment, all of our plumbing fixtures, all of our furniture, right? In which case, I'm going to update the Excel spreadsheet it's writing to, or potentially just the sheet name that it's writing to. But I want to be able to keep the same script going. So it's faster to just rotate through the categories. So in this instance, we are going with our mechanical equipment. But as you can see also, like, you can get your HVAC zones, and, you know, I don't know if anyone in here does energy modeling, but that's pretty exciting for those of us that do. All right. But essentially, almost anything that's going to be in your file falls under a category. So this is a way of getting the parameters of that thing exported out to Excel. All right. Now, I've got my category. I want to get all elements of category. There we go. All elements category. And just to double check to answer your question earlier, we are using only built-in nodes for this. All right, now we've got all of our elements. Now I want to know what type that element is. Helps if you don't have typos. Ooh, not warning element types. Yikes. Hopefully we have none of those. There are no warnings that are going to happen in this file. All right. And now I want to see what we get, just to make sure I picked the right thing. Oh, no. Autodesk did not put any mechanical equipment into their model. Shows you how much they think about our MEP engineers. All right, so let's instead, I know, they're terrible people. Okay, I'm just kidding. I have lots of friends there. They're great. All right, so now if I'm pulling all my line types, right? That's another thing that very frequently you want to fix during documentation, because everyone who has gone into this file has generated their own magical unicorn line types that do not conform with the styles that you want, and you need to be able to fix them, right? So let's find out how many different line types we have. Well, Autodesk apparently only uses one because they don't make real buildings. But hypothetically, you know, they've at least got them, so we can at least see what our results are. All right, and once my computer starts working again, we can work with that. So, no, I don't want to save my Revit example file, silly Revit. All right, so what are the types of things we might want? Well, we might want to know the name, right? So let's do element get parameter by name. So we've got all of our elements, parameter name. Well, I was going to do this for MEP, so all of my examples in here are like the comments field from my mechanical equipment. But instead we're doing, I don't know, lines. Let's not do lines. Let's do lighting devices. Do they have any? Let's find out. Maybe. It's working on it. It's trying to run. It's thinking about it. So anyway, parameter name, this is literally just pick any parameter that exists for that item type. Not entirely sure why this is freaking out about the lighting devices. I assume they didn't put that many in here, but you never know, I guess. But again, your parameter name is just a string. So I'm going to leave this as if Autodesk had put equipment into this file because it's more fun that way. Also slightly more useful. Since I already named it equipment export. All right, so we're just gonna switch this back over to mechanical equipment. And you'll just have to trust me that it works. All right, so now with my elements, I've got now my parameter value of the comments. That's something we're probably gonna wanna write out. Then I'm gonna wanna know the element ID. Because this is something that actually, when I am trying to coordinate with my MEP engineer, or if I am the MEP engineer, I probably want to know which piece of equipment it is that I'm talking about. And you might easily have more than one of the same equipment type. So this gives me my rivet element ID. And then I want to know my element type. All right, so each of these is going to generate a different list. And my computer is doing this great, like, weird auto-saving thing. It's really, really fun. All right, so we have type, and now we have 3 lists that are going to be essentially 3 different columns in my Excel spreadsheet, right? My comments, my type of what it is, like what type of mechanical equipment is it, and then also what's the ID number. You could add additional parameters by just copying and pasting this get parameter value by name and changing the parameter in the code block. You could add additional Revit element ID information. You could add things about sizing. You know, sky's the limit here. We're just going to limit it to 3 because, well, I want to get through at least more than 2 of the 8 scripts I told you I'd get through today. All right. So next thing we're going to do is list dot add item to front. So my list is going to be get parameter value by name. I want to add the column header to the front of this list. So if I didn't add anything to the front, when I write this out to Excel, I'm just going to get gobbledygook, right? It's basically like your schedules, how your schedules have headers and then they have all this information below the headers. We need to give it headers at the top of the list. Otherwise, you're just going to get the information and you're not going to know what the information was. So again, you can use your string node to do this, or you can use comment. Helps if you write string instead of sting. And so the thing that I'm going to add to the front of this list is just the, comments. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my 2 other lists. Since we already have a string called comments, we could also do this by connecting the same one. It's kind of personal preference on how you feel about how long your wires get. In terms of how many times you want to repeat the same thing over and over again versus have really long wires that are hard to trace back. I like keeping my wires super short whenever I can. I feel like it makes things a little bit more legible. So now I'm going to copy and paste that. And instead, this time we're going to do this. And this is going to be the family name. And then this one is going to be our element ID. So now we've got essentially 3 different lists that we want to make into a single list, because if you remember our data export Excel, there's only 1 spot for data. It doesn't have 3, so we have to put it all into 1. Or you could do it one at a time and just change where you're starting your rows, or your columns, sorry. But I think it's easier if we do it all at once. So we're going to do a list create. with our top list, and then we're gonna add our second list, and then we're gonna add our third list. And the output list is gonna be a list of lists. It's gonna be a nested series of 3 lists. Unfortunately, those lists are gonna be essentially my column lists, right? Well, Excel does not write first to the columns and then to the rows. It writes rows and then columns. So we need to flip our lists so that they're formatted that way. And if you remember, that is called transposing. So we're going to do a list, transpose. All of our lists are getting transposed. And then that is the data that we are writing out. Now, this would be a lot more impressive if there actually were any mechanical equipment in this file, since when I hit run, it's just going to be empty and it's not going to write anything out. But I swear it works. We could select something else that has families, like maybe furniture. I bet they have furniture. I don't know if their furniture has any comments or not. We'll find out. We'll get an error probably when it doesn't. So you can see we've got a bunch of different furniture. It's writing out some furniture, whole lot of furniture. And then when we go to our equipment list, you'll see that we have our comments are blank because furniture doesn't actually have comments, our family types, and then our element ID. Before I save this back, I'm going to switch that back to being our mechanical equipment since that's actually the name of this file. But that is how that one works. Yes? So you can create a schedule and export it to Excel, but there are limits as to what things you can have as headers in your schedules. For instance, if you have custom parameters, those are almost never accessible in schedules. Similarly, MEP equipment, which is actually why I had picked it as the example and then unfortunately did not bring a good example file to pull it from, has lots of things that can't be scheduled. Again, Autodesk doesn't always think of their engineers first when they're designing their software. Mechanical equipment doesn't know what room it's in. It doesn't have the ability to have a lot of those like sort of pre-made, preset Autodesk parameters. So MEP engineers have to write their own and have all these custom parameters that then need to be pulled. There's a more advanced script that we'll learn later this year that actually locates all of our equipment by room that it's placed in. But it requires a little bit of Python. So we'll go into that one when we're doing the intro to Python, which, by the way, is going to be in the fall. And it's totally set up for you not to know any Python before you walk through the door. It's like still at sort of intro Dynamo level, and assuming you have never opened Python, when you hear the word Python, you just think of the snake that may or may not eat you. Okay? Yes? They might be writing room 204. This is something that a lot of our MEP folks use. Sometimes it's sizing of the equipment, sometimes it's something else. But also you could update that to being any parameter that they've added. So if like theirs is like size or manufacturer, any parameter value that exists in their families, you can pull. So for us, frequently it has to do with like sizing, or sometimes it has to do with like the equipment schedule. Occasionally they'll put stuff about like what type of fuses and stuff it's supposed to connect up to. I don't do a lot of the coordination. I help the architects do the coordination. So I ask them what they want, and they're like, "Oh, it'd be really useful to have the comments field." So I'm like, "Okay, I'll pull that for you." It can be kind of anything in there. All right, we got 15 minutes. I'm gonna really quickly, since it's gonna use a lot of the same stuff that we've used already, make for you the work set reporter, because I think that is one of the most valuable tools that we've ever made in our office, because work sets get messy so quickly and it's really hard to track stuff down. So, again, we're gonna start at the end with an export to Excel. I'm gonna real quick make a new file here so that we have a file path. All right. And then going back, we're using that file path node again, connecting up the file path. And that's going to be our work sets. Our sheet name is just sheet 1. And then we're going to again have 0, 0. We'll work our way backwards to the data, and our overwrite is going to be true. All right. Now, in terms of the data, I'm going to do this for essentially everything that is visible in the view, which hypothetically is everything in the file since I'm in my 3D view and it should be everything. So I'm just going to take all elements in active view. There we go. All right. All elements in active view is going to collect. Forgot to change to manual again. It's okay. It's just collecting things. It should be all right. Lots of people like connecting up watch nodes to things like this. If you're super masochistic, go for it. But I don't think I ever want to scroll through a list of every single element that exists in a Revit file. You can if you want. I won't stop you. But, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to collect our element IDs, because that seems like a thing that would be useful. And then we're going to generate a string from the object. I'll explain why in just a little bit. And then I also want to know the family name of the thing. Because again, if I'm trying to locate stuff, it'd be good to know, right? So now I've got essentially 3 lists. All of my elements that are in my view, I've got their ID, I've got their full name of what the element is, all 5,924 of them, and I've also got their family name. I'm not going to hit run on this thing until I stop for questions because it's going to take a while every time. Now, I'm going to use a code block. It's not just going to be for a single word. It's going to actually be for a little bit of a line of code. I'm going to have an element plus a dash plus the name. Now, when I click away, all this is doing is some really basic computer code. I generated a variable. I could have called this anything. I could have called it puppy. And then this thing would say puppy. I could have called it X. I could have called it Y. I feel like having somewhat more descriptive names in my code makes it a little bit easier to make sure I'm connecting up the right stuff. All I'm doing here is I am putting strings together. So my string from my object is just going to be all of this stuff. So for instance, for my very first thing, my very first element, it's topography 015545. All I'm doing is I'm going to use my element string, which is going to be those 2 things, and then I'm going to add my dash and then the family name after it. And that's what's going to come out of this code block. It's just now a list of 5,924 elements, plus then an identifier of what family they're in. All right, we'll get to that. We'll use that in a little bit. before we do that, I want to do real quick element parameters. So all of my elements, they have a whole bunch of parameters. I want to turn those into strings so that I can, write those to stuff. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a string contains search. So what I'm looking for is a string searching for the word work set. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because work sets are an element, they're a Revit element, and I don't want them because my work sets are obviously on themselves as work sets. So I'm just removing all of my work sets from my list of elements. And then I'm going to do my ignore case, which is a Boolean again. Once the laptop decides that that's okay, we're going to say yes, please ignore that, because I don't know how Autodesk has capitalized things. All right, so now I'm going to use that list filter by Boolean mask again. So again, now I've just got a true-false list for whether or not the element parameter includes a work set, the name work set. Now, this could admittedly cause an error if someone has created a parameter called work set that is not the parameter that we want. However, hopefully, we're good. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm taking all of these element parameters. I'm looking for where it contains work set. Hopefully no one's created a custom parameter that is also called work set. I have yet to run into that in my office, and we frequently have a lot of interns, so that means it's unlikely that someone's doing that, hopefully, in your office. When you have a lot of very smart interns, but you don't give them a lot of instruction in Revit, and you tell them things like, make sure everything goes on the same work set, and they don't actually know what work sets are, I wouldn't be hugely surprised. Okay, so we're going to use this Boolean as our mask, and now we have our in. Remember, this is the stuff that still remains after we've masked the other stuff out, and that is going to become one of the lists that we write out. So list add item at front. Remember, we need to now create our columns. So we've got our list, and in this instance, I'm just going to do all three of my headers at once. So one of them is going to be the ID, right? Because that was what we generated over here. We've got the element ID. The next one is going to be the element itself in text. And then I want to know what its work set is. So hopefully I grabbed the right things. All right, so work set. Now list add item to front. All right, that's our element column, which we're going to use this one for. Right, it's all the information about the element, including its family. It's just going to go in the column element. And then my last list that I need to create a header for is going to be the ID number. Now, these ID numbers, when you have your BIM manager or something reading through all of this and saying, oh, that thing's on the wrong work set, that thing's on the wrong work set, that thing's on the wrong work set. In Dynamo, you can select elements by their ID number. So you can take all of, without having to comb through your file and find exactly where the particular mullion is that's on the wrong work set in your 8 miles of curtain wall. Instead, you can select it by the ID number and then change its work set parameter to being to the correct work set. That's a pretty quick fix. So again, now we need to have all of these go into the single location, which is going to be our list.create. So first item in the list is that list, next list, and then our final list. This is going to output a list that we need to transpose because we want things to be in columns and not in rows. This is the last step before I hit run. So we're just about there. Once the laptop agrees with me that we're just about there. All right, list transpose. All right, now I'm going to hit run. And this should export all 5,924 elements to an Excel spreadsheet. Tell us what's the ID, what is the element, and what workset is it on. So it might take a while because it's over 5,000. I maybe should have picked a view with a lot fewer things in it. Right. So the second column that we generated is the element and the family name. So what it's going to do is it's going to tell me 2 by 6 million type blah, 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 blah. And then also the family that it's from. So I have some idea of what the thing actually is, what I'm trying to compare it to its work set to make sure that it's on the right one. Frequently what we'll do for this when we're QA'ing it is we'll sort by the work set column so that, you know, all of your stair families are basically named the same thing or have the same thing they start with, or they start with the element name stair or element name topography, right? All those things are pretty regular. So when you're skimming down the list, something that is not the same as all of its neighbors stands out pretty well. And that's one way to figure out, okay, this element is in the wrong place. So when it's me having to do this quality assurance, I just have a highlighter in my hand and I highlight it and then I move on to the next one. And then what I do is I collect all the element IDs at the end and resort them out to the right work sets. Through Dynamo, yeah, is how I do it because I'm really good at Dynamo. I'm terrible at Revit. It's true. Everyone in my office is like, what do you mean you don't know how to make a family that inserts the right location? I'm like, it's not my job. I don't do that. I mean, I would love to know how to do that, and I'm slowly learning how to do that. But like, I am the slowest person in our office at like making walls that are the right length. But I can do this stuff. Yeah.
So when you have this list of items that are in the wrong place, you can use this to filter out which items are with IDs.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going and saying, okay, so 8,000, blah, 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 you just go ahead and type it. You're not typing it all.
No. So what I do usually is, because I find that I'm apparently older than I think I am, if I'm staring at 5,000 items on the screen in Excel, I start to go cross-eyed. So I usually print them out and kill all the trees and take a highlighter to them. And then I go in and I create I basically delete out all the rows that I don't want in the Excel file at the end. So I have an abbreviated Excel. I import that, I pull the ID column, and then I'm able to sort things out that way. It depends on how badly misaligned the work sets are and how many things need to migrate. It's the easiest way to do it is for me to identify what work set it's supposed to be on. So what I'll do is I'll add an additional column that's like correct work set, and then I'll fill in what that work set's supposed to be. So then when I import to Dynamo, I've got the ID number, I've got the name of the right work set, and I can just assign them directly that way. And I essentially overwrite the work set parameter for that ID number using the Excel file, which I would show you, but it's already and this might run forever because I picked something with 5,000 things in it. Usually when I hit the run button on this script, I go like walk down to the cafe down the street to get a cup of tea. So it takes less than 20 minutes, but beyond that, I can't tell you exactly how long it'll take to run. So anyway, I'm gonna save this one also to upload to the website. We have a handful of other things, like the pipe height adjustment, and space and room data clearance, and the thing that creates the sheets and the views and places them on the sheets for you. We'll cover that in a future session, just because, you know, it's always good to have more content. Instead of trying to just dump them up there without any explanation. But if you want them with really great explanation, actually, you can also watch those 2 AU videos. They go through, well, one of them goes through 20 different scripts, all of which are about this level of complexity, all of which are just designed to save time. They use them at AECOM, so as you can imagine, AECOM has lots of files with lots of things in them that need lots of stuff done. So they've streamlined everything as much as possible and standardized it all as much as possible. The other one, the last one, the one that is about making all of your sheets and your views and placing the views on the sheets. And actually there's an additional thing that allows you to basically crop your views to like the rooms to be able to do detail views. Those require a little bit more advanced coding. And we could cover that in a separate session at some point when we can't get a speaker and people want to fool around. But you also can just watch. It's a really great presentation. If you were super comfortable with everything that I showed today, the speaker does a really great job of walking you through things as they get a little bit more complex and explaining to you like how Python nodes work. And essentially his approach is, well, this Python node seems to work. I'm going to cut and paste it and change this one word in it so that it does the thing that I want it to do. So again, it's looking very much at like the baseline level of using those slightly more advanced nodes. So if you want to dip your toe in the water there before we get to our Python session, that'll probably be in November-ish. Yeah, as long as our guest speaker doesn't end up being in November. It'll be sometime late fall. If you want to dip your toe in that pool, that's a great place to get started. And the speaker has great accent and lots of great energy. So, you know, it's kind of fun if you have fun watching things like that. Yeah.
You mentioned AU videos.
Yes. They are on the internet. Here, I can show you since my computer is still trying to come up with our list. So au.autodesk.com is Autodesk University Online. And this is where they put all of the videos of all of the talks that they videotape at Autodesk University. And you can search their AU library by the speaker's name, by the title of the presentation, by, you know, if you just want to know like Dynamo, how many things do they have on Dynamo? Now there are 320 lectures from different Autodesk universities on Dynamo. I mean, you could do Dynamo and documentation, as long as you spell it correctly. Yeah, I mean, everything with Martello is always really good. But like the, you know, this is all different things for looking at workflows within Dynamo. This is the one that actually I was talking about that specifically I pulled a bunch of the scripts from for today. It's about an hour and a half long. They go through 20 different scripts. And you also can kind of skip over the ones that aren't applicable. So if you never work with structure and therefore you don't have to worry about whether or not your columns are being cut at the right levels, you can skip over that one. If you do work with structure, and you've found, like I have, that it's way easier to make a column that goes the full height of the building and then worry about chopping it later, that's a really nice, quick trick to be able to do. And they have a bunch of that type of thing. And also, if you search by the speaker's name, which is on the slide, and I'm blanking out on it right now, for the other one, that is the massive, like, run this at the beginning of your project. If your project has standardized names for views and standardized names for most of the sheets, you can generate all of your sheets and place all the views on those sheets right at the start of your project. Unfortunately, our firm kind of makes up our standards for every project for that stuff. So I was super impressed with it, and I was like, oh, that's why other people have standards. We have standards, but they get altered for every single project. So we don't have standard sheet names because we do all kinds of crazy projects that have all kinds of crazy sheets. But hypothetically, if you're in a firm that does much more of the same type of project over and over again, you know mostly what your sheet names are, how many sheets you're going to need, what your views are that are going to go on those sheets, and you can pre-populate them all. He also goes into then cropping your views to the room boundary for being able to do those room details or those room plans. And again, it'll generate all those views for you and crop them for you. And if you combine that with the sheet placement part of the other script, it then will also place it on sheets for you. Yeah. So when we're talking about saving time, that's what we're talking about. But it does require a little bit more advanced Dynamo than we've gotten to at this point. If I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in the room, which is great. If y'all keep coming back all the time, next year we'll do the 200 series in Dynamo, and we'll be able to cover stuff like that. All right? Thank you again, everybody, for coming. My husband will kill me if I'm home late. So, thank you and good night.